Good morning from my side. It's my pleasure to engage your attention for a few minutes to the Health Nugget. And today I would like to talk about, it's actually a continuation of what we did last week. I introduced you to this lady called Martha Claire Morris. She was a nutritionalist that worked out of Chicago University. And she developed the MIND diet. And the MIND diet is an acronym for the merging of the two diets that were known to be best for brain health, the Mediterranean diet and the so-called DASH diet, which is the dietary approach to systemic hypertension. And basically what she pointed out was the fact that in every study that they looked at, they found that the performance of the human brain correlates to the use of green leafy vegetables. And here you have one of the studies that she did, and as you can see here on the next slide, it says here, in the first line, this was a prospective study done on close to 1,000 people, and if you read the underlined section, which is a little difficult there, it says, basically the outcome was that the consumption of green leafy vegetables was associated with slower cognitive decline, the equivalent of being 11 years compared to those who had the lowest intake of green leafy vegetables, which is enormous. And one of the components that drive the brain protective effect is lutein. And lutein is a carotenoid. Carotenoid, you know, carrots have a yellowish orange color, and so does also the background of our eye. What you see there is what the ophthalmologist sees when he looks at the background of your eye. And to your right, where you've got that light spot there, that's the entrance of the optic nerve. And that spot in the middle is the macula. That is the spot where you've got the sharpest vision, where you also have the possibility to delineate the colors. And therefore, lutein is also called an eye vitamin, and that is true, but there's a bigger story. And you've got, because the background of the eye, where the optic nerve enters, it fizzles out into hundreds and thousands of branches, nerval branches that are actually a brain extension. So the only place in the body where you can actually look at nervous system tissue is the background of your eye. And that is where lutein accumulates, and it accumulates also in your brain. In fact, lutein accounts for about 60 to 70% of total carotenoids in the infant brain, and it remains the dominant carotenoid in brain tissue throughout life. Lutein is a part of your brain tissue, and we read here, lutein crosses the blood-brain barrier. That means when you eat it, it goes into the bloodstream, and then it is able to go into the brain as well, and it concentrates in membrane-rich regions, particularly gray matter, that is basically the surface of the brain, about ½ an inch thick. The frontal cortex is what is called here the frontal lobe, and the hippocampus, which is in the depth of the brain, and these are the two brain regions that basically make up our individuality. As you can read here in the next paragraph, it says that these are the regions governing memory, that's the hippocampus, executive function and processing speed. It's not a peripheral player, it's embedded in the architecture. Now this could be one thing, you know, it's part of the structure, like bricks are part of a wall, but there's more to it. When you look at lutein levels, then you will see lutein levels correspond to cognitive performance levels. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is the reason why the other one functions, but there is a strong possibility. Now it says here, multiple studies have found that macular pigment, macula is that central spot of your sharpest vision. Pigment opticum, once more, I found that macular pigment optical density, MPOD, a non-invasive measure of lutein in the retina, correlates strongly with lutein concentrations in the brain and with cognitive performance. Higher MPODs is associated with better verbal fluency, faster processing speed, enhanced memory recall, and improved executive function. This isn't simple. In older adults, the relationship between lutein status and cognitive performance is robust and replicated across multiple studies. Now, structural brain preservation. Neuroimaging studies show that older adults with higher level lutein levels have thicker gray matter in regions vulnerable to age-related atrophy. Atrophy means the shrinking away of tissue because basically it is not used anymore or it is not nutritionally supplied anymore, particularly the parahippocampal gyrus. That is the region where short-term and long-term memory is working. They also show greater white matter integrity. That is, all the pathways that go to the, if you've got the surface of the brain, the gray matter is where the nerve cells live, and the white matter are all the pathways that lead to these nerve cells, and from the nerve cells back to certain nuclei in the brain. In other words, lutein appears to be not only structurally important, but also functionally important. So lutein is not just for old people. In infants, lutein is the dominant carotenoid in umbilical cord blood and breast milk. The placenta preferentially transfers lutein to the fetus. That is how important it is. And formula-fed infants have lower lutein status unless the formula is supplemented. Children, higher lutein levels correlate with better academic performance and cognitive test scores in school-age kids. If you want your kids to be bright, feed them green leafy vegetables. In young adults, even in healthy adults, 18 to 30 years old, lutein supplementation improves visual processing speed and reaction time. And this is partially due because the lutein consumption in the average American diet is a joke. Why does it work? I don't want to read through all of it. You can just read the left subtitle. Lutein works as an antioxidant. It works as an anti-inflammatory. It enhances the gap junction upregulation. That means the communication from cell to cell and membrane stabilization. And that is, lutein is important because it is a fat-soluble compound, like you also have vitamin E and A, which you find in carrots. They are all fat-soluble. So A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble vitamins. So, where do you get it? King Kale is the undisputed champion of the lutein leek and yum. When did you last eat kale? You can also find it in spinach, Swiss chard, collard greens, and you can also find it in egg yolks. And this is interesting because the fat in the matrix of the eggs makes it more bioavailable. The point there is whenever you eat lutein, so if you have kale, spinach, Swiss chard, collard greens, pistachios, broccoli, and so forth, make sure that there's a little bit of fat with it. Otherwise, the absorption drops dramatically. That is the message there. Regarding supplementation, most studies use 10 to 20 micrograms a day, often combined with zeaxanthin, another carotenoid that co-localizes with lutein also in the macula. And again, it needs fat to be absorbed. The last paragraph here, bioavailability varies enormously. The food matrix matters. Egg-derived lutein is absorbed roughly 2 to 3 times better than spinach-derived lutein, and spinach-derived is better than supplements in some comparisons. The well-formulated supplements with oil close that gap. Now, I would like to show you before we get to the bottom line. I thought there was another slide in here. Yeah. I inserted this slide after I sent the presentation. Okay. The point I wanted to make is that when you look at spinach and broccoli and cabbage and all these green leafy vegetables. And I checked the date. I presented this sometime in summer 21. So those who have eaten a lot of kale in the meantime should be able to remember what these green leafy vegetables do to you other than provide you with lutein to have a good memory. Anybody? These veggies, they have a stimulating influence on the stem cells of certain cell lines that are in the bone marrow, and that sign for the restructuring of your inner lining of the blood vessels. In medical terms, you call this endothelium. So the inner lining of the blood vessel is continually replaced. Just think of that. The inner lining of our blood vessels are continuously replaced if we so nudge them to do so and do not stop them by our dietary habits. Heavy fatty meals, a lot of cholesterol will slow that process down. But these veggies, they prompt these cell lines to produce more of the inner cell lining, replacing old cells with new cells. And at the same time, they are nitrate rich. And nitrogen relates to nitrogen monoxide, which is used by the inner cell lining of the blood vessels to dilate. It is the signal that is needed to dilate. And there's a law in physics that says when you dilate a vessel by a certain distance x, then your flow increases x to the 4th power. You can imagine what that means for the blood flow. The point being, if you eat lutein, you provide structure and function to the brain, and at the same time, the same veggies increase the blood flow to your vein, to your brain, and keep the arteries, the highways that lead to the brain open for optimal function. And this is not a purpose in itself. Why should God have made this way? The sharper you can think, the better you understand God. That's the bottom line. God bless you.